My name is Robert Niewiadomski, and I serve as an assistant clinical professor here at the Division of Curriculum and Teaching. I am delighted to welcome you tonight to our panel discussion called Threat or Opportunity, the Impact of Artificial Intelligence on Education. It is a joint presentation by our honor societies and the Innovation in Curriculum and Instruction PhD program at Fordham University's Graduate School of Education. I am thrilled to moderate this first panel at Fordham University that is specifically dedicated to exploring the impact of recent developments in AI on education. And as far as I can tell, this is the only event of this kind so far at the university. A big thank you to all those who helped make this possible and contributed to the organization and setting up of this event. In particular, we are grateful to Dr. Jose Luisa Alvarado, the Dean of GSC, Dr. Diane Rodriguez, the Associate Dean, as well as Dr. Aida Navarez-La Torre, the Chair of CNT, for the support of the event. And also thank you, many others who are helping: Marilyn, Dorcas, Trisha, Annie, Elena, Graham, Chloe, Eva, Sandra, Carolyn, James, Catherine, and others. And now, please join me in extending a warm welcome to our Associate Dean, Dr. Diane Rodriguez.
Now you know my name is Dr. Diane Rodriguez, and I am your Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the Graduate School of Education. It's kind of interesting to see my picture up there. I was not expecting that. So on behalf of Dean Alvarado, welcome to Fordham University Honor Society inaugural series, Critical Issues in Contemporary Education. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us in this room and joining us online as well to learn more about the impact of artificial intelligence on teaching and learning. And as you know, this has been a very big topic on the news lately. So we have a group of experts who will be discussing and sharing their expertise. And we're very fortunate to have this amazing panel from school districts, researchers, professors who have the expertise in artificial intelligence and teaching and learning. I want to encourage you to reflect and participate in this important discussion this evening and share your questions and concerns with the panel. And at this time, it's a privilege to invite my colleague, Dr. Aida La Torre Nevares, the chair of the Curriculum and Teaching Division.
Okay.
That's it.
A few years ago. So welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure and I'm delighted for you to be here joining us tonight in this important event. And why is this important? For the Division of Curriculum and Teaching, this event marks a new beginning for us in sponsoring, once again, after COVID, scholarly discussions. In this tonight, of course, on a very current topic, artificial intelligence and its impact in education. The academic conversation series that we start tonight on critical issues in contemporary education will be done once in the fall semester and one in the spring. And tonight, this event is also important because of the collaboration that we are seeing with the Honor Society in curriculum and teaching, the Kappa Delta Pi. I encourage everyone to explore, and if you qualify, apply. It's a great honor to be part of a member of this honor society, and the PhD program in innovation in curriculum and instruction. We have another layer of collaboration in the panel that are here and in the audience. All of you are students, current students, some faculty as well are in the audience. But the collaboration also is designed to integrate voices from current faculty at Fordham, both tenure faculty and adjunct, alumni, recent graduates from the School of Ed, also members of our stakeholder community outside Fordham, principals, in this case, school district administrators. And finally, also voices that form part of the larger Fordham research community. That's what your panelists tonight represent. And we welcome you, and we're really excited for you to be here and help us to begin this series. Finally, I think that tonight is important because it really creates a pathway to continue building community, both through in-person learning as well as online learning. So I think that this collaboration between different modalities really help us see that community needs to be expanded. And one way to expand it is through technology. So it really feels good for me to welcome all of you tonight in this first inaugural panel discussion. And I'm sure that this is the first of many more to come in the future. So welcome and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Latorre. And so now to the exciting stuff about our panel and the topic. So for decades, the AI community has been searching for the Holy Grail, the general AI, also known as strong AI, that can perform any intellectual task a human can do with learning and adaptation abilities. Now, before you get too excited, we haven't quite reached that level yet, but experts say it's not a matter of if, but when we finally attain that general AI. However, the recent advancements in the more weaker or narrow AI are not a joke. AI can solve math problems, as some of you probably experienced at the beginning of this meeting. Probably better than most of us. It can create musical pieces and visual arts and write essays that make many of us feel like amateurs. And as expected, this has caused a bit of a buzz in the educational world with questions about assignments, assessments, originality, and the skills students should master. But fear not, we have a panel of experts ranging from researchers to practitioners to administrators that are here to help us make sense of it. And now starting from my right, okay, I'm sorry, there we go. We have Dr. Roy Fernandez, who is a retired Lehman College professor. He also currently serves as an adjunct professor at Fordham's GSC and CUNY, and is also an educational consultant. Thank you, welcome. And next, we have Leila Manson, our own from the ICI, doctoral student and a teacher, literacy coach, educational administrator with the NYC DOE, and an adjunct also here at Fordham. Then we have Father Kevin Spinali, who is an assistant professor at the Division of Curriculum and Teaching, has been an English teacher for over 2 decades, a Jesuit for 17 years, and a priest for 7. Welcome. Then we have, that was Dr. Spinali. And now we have Dr. Nicole Zaiden, who is an assistant director of emerging educational technologies at Fordham's Office of Information Technology, and she's also an adjunct instructor here at Fordham GSC. And finally, at the very end of the table, we have Dr. Edgar McIntosh, who is an assistant superintendent for curriculum, instruction, and assessment at Scarsdale Public Schools and a co-director of the Center for Innovation. So please join me in giving a round of applause for our distinguished panelists. And for your convenience, this slide will stay to help you identify the panelists in case you would like to ask them questions that are directed specifically at them. We'll have about 45 minutes for the panel discussion, followed by 45 minutes of Q&As from you as the audience, as the in-person audience, as well as our virtual participants joining us via Zoom. So let's get started. My first question will be for Edgar. So a decade ago, when I worked in a middle school, I tried to sell middle schoolers on memorizing a multiplication table. One student was genuinely perplexed and asked, "Why bother when my phone can do it?" My co-teacher had some convincing argument, but the students were not solved. Now the applications can solve the math problem or write an essay. Why would we ask students to know or do something that a machine can do?
Robert, that's a really good question. So in some cases, there is no point. We shouldn't ask them to do things that a machine can do. I was actually, are there any elementary people? Elementary teachers? Okay, so I was with a group of 5th graders who had invited me into their school because they wanted to tell me how we needed to get rid of homework. No, it was organized. We sat around, it was a little bit of a focus group, and they had, peer-reviewed studies. They were quoting Alfie Kohn here and there and telling me all the bad things about it. And then one little boy at one point just said, "Look, homework is so boring, I can just ask Alexa, and Alexa can tell me." So there are, in certain cases, where some of the homework assignments that we give, some of the things that we're asking kids to do that relate to rote things are things that we should question. On the other hand, there are certain efficiencies with not just middle schoolers, but students knowing, for example, their times table. And when I was a 1st grade teacher, we used to do something where we called it the brain versus the calculator. I don't know if you've ever done this with your students, but it's basically you turn around flashcards and kids either they calculate it in their brain what the answer is, or they punch it into a calculator. And in many cases, it is much faster for kids to do it in their head or to think it out than for them to punch it into a calculator. So it gets to that big idea. Sometimes we just need to have things at the tip of our tongue. We need to have that foundational information and that knowledge. And that foundational information is really important. And from that knowledge, then we build deeper and more complex understandings of things. And there's also something that is inherently important about learning and skills and knowledge and things that cannot be replaced by a machine. I imagine in fairly near future that we will have things that we can attach to our mouths and our ears that will translate into other languages, which will create an efficiency. But does that mean that we shouldn't have our students learn other languages? And my answer would be say, of course, by learning languages, you are increasing your brain capacity, the synapses are growing stronger, you're gaining perspective, you're having an opportunity to struggle, show vulnerability, put yourself in another position, all very, very important skills. The other, and finally, I think what is probably the most important, and this does relate to what's going on right now with Chat GPT, is that there are certain things that machines can do, but they don't necessarily, and I don't know if you've played around with Chat GPT, but it's not great at doing certain things. And one of the things that it's not so great at is it's not so great at always being accurate. And in having a conversation with an 8th grader who she and her class actually had a chance to play around with it and look at it and read aloud from some of the work that it's producing, they knew as 8th graders, you know what, this essay lacks a voice, like a real voice. It sounds a little canned. Even if it was doing tricks and writing in certain styles, they were able to identify that it was lacking a certain human quality that the machine did not have the sophistication yet, or may never have the sophistication to provide the kind of nuance that a human being can.
Okay, so more about the app that you mentioned, Chat GPT, that definitely created a lot of not only buzz, but quite frankly, frustration in many circles, right? We know about educational systems that try to ban completely use of the app. There's a university, I believe, in South Wales, Australia, that they, in some of the departments, they decided to completely go back to pen and paper kind of assignments or writing exercises in class because of that. So Daniel Herman from The Atlantic wrote something about that specific app in the following way. He said, the arrival of OpenAI's Chat GPT, a program that generates sophisticated text in response to any prompt that you can imagine, may signal the end of writing assignments altogether, and maybe even the end of writing as a gatekeeper, a metric for intelligence, a teachable skill. And then he continues, I have always said to his students, you may not be interested in poetry or civics, but no matter what you end up doing with your life, a basic competence in writing is an absolutely essential skill. Whether it's for college admission, writing a cover letter, or when applying for a job, or just writing an email to your boss. I don't know if either of those things are true anymore. It's no longer obvious to me that my teenagers actually will need to develop these basic skills, or if the logic still holds that the fundamentals are necessary for experimentation. What would be your reaction to that?
Well, I would, it's interesting, I was just talking to Nicole about this. I think that, you know, it's interesting when you say that people are reacting in different ways to the Chat GPT and some people, you know, trying to ban it. Probably, you know, that New York City schools actually, I don't know if it's still, is it still banned? That's problematic, I think, not to judge the New York City schools, but the fact of the matter is that the genie is out of the bottle. So we need to actually look critically and thoughtfully at how we can use this Chat GPT and other AI as tools to help accelerate the learning rather than block it out. And when I was talking to the head of the English department, the way that they're using it is they're using it to see what its capability is and see where the gaps are. And I don't know if it was part of the Atlantic article, but, you know, and this is what Nicole and I were talking about, but is that one of the biggest biases that it has is that it goes out and it sources all the information that's out there and available open source. And we know that there is a particular point of view and a perspective that is has a very kind of it's centered on at certain groups of people, and other voices are marginalized. So you can ask it to write an essay, but it is actually just sourcing from what the dominant voice is. We need to be able to look at that so that we can look through a critical lens. We're doing a lot of work in our district at looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking at those voices that have been marginalized and have been really made invisible. And we know that in order to know how we can use this and how we can make sure that what we're doing is representing quality, we need to not shut it out, but have it available to us. I think that there are times when we need to thoughtfully and critically put aside the technology and actually hunker down and do writing, that there is value, intrinsic value in that. But I also think that we need to know what the technologies are. You want to comment on that? I didn't.
Thank you, Edgar. Absolutely. We were just talking about this, and one of the important things is if you remember the sentiment, if anyone remembers the sentiment of the calculator when it first came out, right? It was banned. And then it came back as something required to do your work. So it's a similar sentiment in this, but more importantly, and you mentioned the word efficiency, Edgar, not just efficiency, but more importantly, it's important to ensure AI is developed and used in a way that promotes equitable access to everybody. So it's important that we keep in mind that this could potentially perpetuate previous biases if it's not, you know, taken into consideration as we move towards this sophisticated technology.
If you could, Nicole, if you could elaborate a little bit on this aspect, how does AI impact access to education, specifically for marginalized students?
Absolutely. It has the potential to actually widen or narrow the educational divide for marginalized students. So on one hand, it can provide personalized learning experiences. It can increase access if access is given to all. However, it can also raise a lot of concerns about the fairness and biases behind that, especially for marginalized students. And if you also consider there is the potential that it can provide accessibility for students, and there are the positive sides of that. However, if it's not fair to everybody and you're lacking that equity, then you're creating digital divides for these marginalized students. Some of those digital divides can include the lack of access to the actual technology itself, a lack of internet connectivity, because you do need the internet to connect to this, and even the lack of devices, having the devices to connect to AI or any kind of emerging technology like that. So biases in AI algorithms and data, as I mentioned, can also have a lack of cultural sensitivity. So the technology may not be able to understand certain perspectives or experiences in different cultures as well.
Robert, could I add to that? I was reading in the Washington Post, sorry, in the Washington Post.
Absolutely, you may.
Oh, thank you.
But I was ready to say that to Nicole's point, that I did test Chat GPT for biases. And it very politely responded to me, that I cannot, we've got to embrace, diversity, include. So I think that the creators of the algorithms were very cognizant of that to some extent, which it doesn't mean that in some on some level the biases are not built into it, right? Right, please.
Yeah, just to follow up on a point that Edgar made in terms of let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I was reading an opinion piece this morning in the Washington Post. There's this big debate now among professors at higher ed banning take-home essays because of the Chat GPT. And this professor's point was similar to what you were talking about. Let's keep it there. It was a philosophy professor whose course is very much dependent on the development of a writing piece, a position. So instead of banning the Chat GPT and giving essay exams in class that would not, develop the writing process that he is after, give them access to the Chat GPT and see, is it a good piece of writing? Is it not a good piece of writing? Because to ban it and just give some kind of quiz or test that only requires a multiple choice will not teach these philosophy students about the writing process. So I think that makes good sense in terms of doing that. We have a tendency in education to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've been in education for 40 some odd years, Anytime a newer way of doing things comes across, we say, oh no, we're going the old way, we're not going to do it anyway. But I like to focus on continuums. There may be pieces of the new way of doing it that works for you, and that works for the population with whom you're working. So that I think we're very guilty of that in the field of education to do that. I think to follow Nicole's point, I think there's a lot of IA out there that's very useful for emergent bilinguals. But I think not only the IA itself, but the access to the AI is very important. And I think we saw that with COVID, 2 or 3 years ago. If you believe in the statewide national reading tests and math scores, they significantly were lowered for all students, but certainly for the marginalized groups. So it's not only the AI being authentic and being sensitive to the marginalized groups, but it's also the access to the AI, how are families sort of helped and discuss with AI. What is AI? It's something more than just a gadget that children play with. There are households where AI is something that occurs every day at a more sophisticated level. So how do school districts ensure that it's not only the AI, but it's the access? And I'll talk a little bit more about that, certainly, when I come around. But just wanted to mention that.
Yes, a little bit more of on that. I would like to follow up with a question for you, if that's okay. You work with multilingual students. Obviously, this is one of the fields that you specialize in. So in terms of the access of multilingual students in the context of whether it's Chat GPT or any type of big language sort of generative app, right? What is your opinion on that? Does AI equalize or amplify the language barriers in education?
Well, I think there's a plethora of research that indicates that AI does support emergent bilinguals. There's a wealth of research that has been done in different programs of, excuse me, artificial intelligence, supporting students' multisensory engagement, which is something that's very important for an emergent bilingual student. If you can't speak or hear, you might be able to see it and touch it, and you might be able to engage in a more elongated conversation with the emergent bilingual student in whatever the second language happens to be. In this particular context, certainly, it would be English. I think it also provides low-risk environments for learning. Students could put on any kind of headphone and listen to English language, listen to perhaps poems, listen to songs, listen to music in English, and they could take risks that they may not take in general classrooms where there are 4 or 5 students who are English speakers who might make fun or bully them because of their accent or because of their incorrect grammar. It creates authentic environments that includes disabled students as well, because they're also part of the marginalized group. And it also reinforces positive social behavior. So I think in answer to, could it be a bridge? Absolutely, it can be a bridge. I think the threat, and I think what would disengage AI from success would be the implementation of it. And there I have a lot of issues. I think implementation is not automatic across school districts. I think the poorest school districts probably have a lower rate of acceptance of AI working for marginalized groups. There's teacher resistance, perhaps believing that such sophisticated software might be appropriate for one group, but it may not be appropriate for the more marginalized groups, and certainly for the English language learners or the emergent bilinguals, as I like to call them. I think it also depends on how it's used in the learning process, and I think Nicole was alluding to that earlier. If you're going to use it to introduce emergent bilinguals to English literature, for example, are there things that, you know, emergent bilinguals might want to hear that has some kind of foundation in other cultures that are not necessarily in the United States? To follow up on a point, and I made a little note here when Nicole was saying, you know, it depends on who writes for the chatbots or whatever. Let's hope it is in Florida, where, you know, 99.99% of things are being, you know, sort of condemned to eternity because they speak about marginalized groups. And certainly let's not look at the College Board for sort of making AP or African Americans less meaningful, taking out, you know, anything that has to do with discussion of issues of slavery in the United States and critical race theory. So if students, you know, were to chat about that in Florida and someone from Florida wrote it, they would certainly not get a clear indication of what it's about. But yet it would be a nice conversation piece to bring into a social studies classroom that had a lot of marginalized folk in it, including LGBTQ students. I think also a major piece of AI, we're all quick to jump on the bandwagon. We know how expensive all of that technological equipment is. What are the district funds for AI and who has priority? That's an interesting question to ask. You know, when I go to school districts and they ask about working with emergent bilinguals, certainly the meaningful digital resources, as Nicole mentioned, the consideration of learners' ecology, class, culture, language, beliefs. What do families believe in terms of artificial intelligence? Do they even understand what artificial intelligence is? And trabajo del diablo or no? Is it the work of the devil or what? You know, we're really not used to that kind of nuanced learning. So how do we involve community-based organizations to work with teachers and families and school districts to make better use of AI for marginalized groups? I think is an important consideration. So to me, you know, just to have diverse educational environments and have all these la-di-da approaches, you know, to bilingualism and to working with English language learners isn't enough. Not only does it need to be diverse, it needs to be inclusive. And I think that's what Nicole was alluding to earlier. And there are many ways of doing that. We're not in the Super Bowl alone. We could involve a lot of community-based organizations and certainly colleges and universities to do that. So I guess an answer to your question, to the thematic frame of tonight, it can be a bridge. There's a lot of research out there that really talks to that, and having worked with some AI programs, and I'm sure later we'll talk about some of those at the district level, it can work, but it could also be disastrous depending on how it's implemented. And that's certainly the way I look at it.
Yes, thank you. And I think it's worth noting that right now, Chat GPT and some other similar apps are at the stage of a sort of learning and trial, right? They allow general public to use it just for the benefit of the app. However, there will be a time when they'll start monetizing on it, right? And that speaks to your point of access. And also, if the application is being trained on data that is, let's say, digitized or not, it has to be digitized in this case. But if it's owned by public libraries, institutions, universities, which would allow that to be trained on it, then it raises some questions of then access and fairness later, right? Whether we want to, we as a society, whether we would want to allow those companies to monetize on something that they sort of harness from our common knowledge, right?
Yes.
So that's definitely a point that we might speak to a little bit later. Leila, the other divergent views on the usefulness and the impact of apps like Chat GPT. In our previous conversation that we had about this, right? You told me you mentioned about an exchange that you had with your son, who is a writer, right? And you told me that you talked about Chat GPT, and your son said that this type of AI is, and I quote here, a threat to the authenticity of the individual voice. And I just wonder what were your thoughts about that when you had that conversation?
Well, when speaking to my son and just in general, I had some wonderings. We had a really good conversation, and coming from his perspective in his field, I was wondering two things, and both as an educator and a parent, I thought, well, what if future voices become over-reliant? It was the worrying side of me. It was, what if we become over-reliant on AI tools, sort of a crutch? And this possibly could take away the ability to think critically and use what we were born hardwired to do, is to speak. So just as human beings, right, we were born with that ability. What would that do? But then I also thought, as we continue to talk, I had another wondering, and I wanted to be more optimistic and positive and the possibilities, right? As an educator, I think there's so many possibilities for our children. So what about the efficiency that the panelists here are mentioning? Using it efficiently, using it responsibly as a leverage, right? We have to think of it as this way. How are we going to use these tools to leverage our own advancement? And in areas of education, especially I think of the field that I'm in with early childhood, K to 12, literacy coaching, everyone that I work with on a daily basis, we want to be able to develop higher order thinking skills. We want to enhance these learning opportunities for our students. So if we use them responsibly and we educate each other and work as a community, right? As a community of learners. And just like we're here today, we have to continue this. So how are we going to be able to use it for productivity? And we ended up looking at both sides, appreciating both sides, respecting both sides, and feeling a little better about the conversation and knowing that it's only going to evolve from here. And it takes moments like this to talk about, funding, to talk about just what that it is here to stay, and what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We have to be very thoughtful about that. So maybe there are, organizations or institutions that are putting a pause right now, but it's a healthy pause. It's a pause so that we can get together and think about ways that we can benefit in the long run, right? Build our knowledge base, continue to think critically, be researchers, And that brings me right to teacher preparation. You know, very passionate about that. And our leaders who are leading schools, institutions, what are we doing to educate them and be able to be responsible, right? Be responsible for our future voices so that we don't feel this way. And I totally respect my son for feeling that way and other young adults and of all ages. Some of us do feel that it is a threat, and that's okay. And some of us do want to maximize and leverage this, and that's great too. So let's make sure we keep the conversation going, because I want to make sure that at least we don't lose the value or the wanting to build on those fundamentals, right? That's what I do every day. I go into schools and we are making sure that our children are learning the fundamentals of literacy and in both spoken and written language. And so that when we get into, let's say, higher education, and we can make these good choices and use the tools responsibly so that we can support one another and just grow as a human race.
This is a extraordinary, astonishing invention. This is a printed book. It is a tremendous feat because it's easily reproducible. It has an index. It represents the externalized speech of an individual. It's easily stored. It lasts a long time. It's cheap for the most part. It can be added to, subtracted to. It as a table of contents. Each page looks extraordinarily neat, ordered. If I get another copy of this book, page 57 is the same in your copy as it is in mine. Those were revolutionary ideas for much of the middle part of the last millennia. It affected knowledge. These inventions, or this invention affected knowledge so much that knowledge became something else. Knowledge became something linear and neat. It had a place, it had a reference point, and it was easily discoverable and easily disseminated. I think we're at another point like this, but I want to stick with the book thing first. The first real purpose of books was to create compendia of commonplaces. Folks know what a commonplace is. I think we use it as something synonymous with a cliche. So something we hear all the time, something we can rely on. We've heard a number of times tonight, baby out with the bathwater. Something that we use, we all have a sense of what it means, and it's a purposeful cliche. Now, before books were created, cliches were the way to go. It was what everybody recognized, and people waited for cliches. People waited for a quotation of something that was already previously heard and known. Since this book, or since the invention of the book, and since we rely on print, we have a real distaste for cliche and lack of originality. Our preferences even are changed by an invention like this. Not only our preferences, but also the way we think, our consciousness. Back to commonplaces. In the 16th century, 17th century, the education system was still centered upon rhetoric. Rhetoric was the highest bit of learning unless you went into my other job, namely theology or something like that. Then you'd have to study some natural philosophy and kind of not the greatest syllogisms, and then what they thought of theology in the 16th century. The epitome of an educated person was rhetoric, knowledge of rhetoric. And the way that you excel at rhetoric is to have the right thing to say at the right time to persuade the person or the people you're speaking to. And commonplace compendia compiled all of what was extantly published in classical sources, ancient Greek, Latin, Hebrew, scripture, or Dante and the like. And you relied on that in order to always have an appropriate flow of language called copia. So again, index, commonplaces, these are all, they come all online with books. The way that I understand a technology that will change us, that will change the way we think and also change our preferences. The way that I understand Chat GPT or artificial intelligence as a whole, which lacks the affective consciousness that we have, particularly around insight and the validation of our insights, and therefore our thoughtful contribution to knowledge. But in any case, books were really good at storing knowledge, accumulating knowledge, and making knowledge easily retrievable. Clearly, computers do the same. The French word for a computer is ordinateur. It orders information. It's a machine that quickly orders massive amounts of words and information. I think Chat GPT and artificial education, we'll probably get there, but artificial intelligence, it accumulates, it stores, and it's digitized capacity. And part of, I think, bias is what it can harvest right now is basically open non-copyright stuff in English from, say, late 19th century up to the copyright laws, which is somewhere in the 20s and 30s. It's kind of stuck there, but for maybe open journalistic sources and other things that are online. So it does those things. It accumulates knowledge, stores it, it makes it easily retrievable, or computers order it exceedingly well, organize it in these noetic bins or these epistemological spaces, storehouses. But what Chat GPT does is it bespokes it. It customizes the information that you want. It packages it. So it does the further step that we always ask our students to do. Go read that chunk of stuff, synthesize it for me, and demonstrate that you actually put the toil in of trying to think about and comprehend and taking things together, and demonstrate a synthesis through this thing that's easily, again, accumulated, retrieved, stored, looked at, corrected, a paper. So I think the way that we think about writing will change tremendously, because we have something that makes the things that we already ask our students to do, namely bespoke a synthesis of some body of knowledge. It's going to do that. I'm going too long. Can I say one more thing? Start to be a gas bag here.
I guess books are not going away.
I hope not. All my notes are in.
That is pretty good. But just wanted to follow up.
Sure.
Anybody can take that question. In light of what Father Spinelli just said, how will, it's not, well, we know it will, but how will AI change the teacher's role there in the process?
I think, again, if used responsibly, and it could be a time-saving tool. It could be a time-saving tool where teachers, again, can leverage this, let's say, an assignment that's given, an original, you get your draft, and then utilize that time that's saved so that the students can think critically and enhance the product. So again, it's a productivity opportunity, an opportunity to produce and to create a time and space for the students that you're in charge of to do bigger, better things.
So I'm relieved, so we're still going to keep our jobs.
Well, I do have to say, I think in a broader sense, that what it what it is really creating a sense of urgency around is something that we've been talking about for a long time in education, and that's in the development of our students, what used to be called soft skills or human skills. In the business world, they call them power skills. And that we have to think in terms of not just, giving them knowledge, but also thinking about the dispositions, their creativity, their curiosity, their bravery, their critical thinking. With all of this, I mean, when you're talking about it being able to, the current Chat GPT being able to synthesize, it's actually good at really kind of cutting and pasting, what they call pastiching is the word that's been going around. And actually, one of the things that I heard that it does too is something called, it will say something absolutely absurd out of the blue. So they call them hallucinations. That's what they do. So occasionally you'll come across them and there's a lot, I mean, on social media where they're talking about this. So we need to really double down on media literacy and critical thinking, because when I think about where the existential threat is, some of it is around the easy and quick development of human-like voices to be able to put false information out there. So you can actually have it, argue against the efficacy of vaccines, and it will create not just one tweet about it, but a million original ones. And so there is a fear there. But so I think as educators, we can use the tool, but we also need to be teaching into these human skills.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's here to stay. And I think just in the same way that at a college level course, we teach students how to critique research. This is another research tool. Okay, it's called Chat GPT or AI, whatever you call it. How do we use that to better our arguments, to better our writing, to better our essays? What kind of probes should we ask when we're reading this? I think that's a role that educators play, certainly. But I think that children aren't going to access it, university students aren't going to access it, they are. But I think we make it another research tool, and we equip them with skills to read between the lines, so to speak, another cliche there, so that you can either use it or not use it. And fake news, I mean, it's all over the place, and people still believe that things occur because vaccines don't work, and lasers from outer space from to California from fires and whatever, and people do believe that. A substantial number of people believe it. So yes, we need to work with students in terms of how do we detect whether the argument is feasible, not feasible. Is it a good argument? Is it not a good argument? What are the parts of it?
And some educational systems are catching up with that. I guess in Finland, they're always in the avant-garde, right? They actually have introduced a subject, I believe, in high school, so maybe even other grades, that deals with fake news and teaches explicitly from authentic sources how to discern the fake news. So I think that the evolution of that is going in that direction as well.
Yeah, and NCTE actually has now part of their strands it is around media literacy and the development of those skills very early on to be able to identify, reliable sources. And
I'm going to ask one more question before we take questions from the audience. So this is a warning to the audience. Get your questions ready, because after that you'll have a chance to ask. And Katerina will be assisting. Can you raise your hand, please? Yes, she'll be assisting you. If you have a question, you will just raise your hand and she'll come up to you and give you the mic. And Tricia also is moderating the online the meeting and curating questions. So, but before we do that, I just wanted to ask question that will become probably very relevant very soon when the AI even progresses further. It's not a question, if, but if when. It's basically it has to do with the regulation of AI, whether it should be regulated and who should do it.
Secret police.
I'm signing up.
It'll be a good job. Sorry to derail again, but I think maybe one of the ways of thinking about the future of AI is, and we keep thinking about the nature of it, is to think about the nature of us in a deeper way, who we are, how we think, what epistemology is, what is our account for learning, how do we cultivate that better in individuals, what do we do when we write? Is it just to synthesize information, or is it actually to address what we feel deeply about to a further interiority with the desire for a response? And to anticipate that response thoughtfully and with great aplomb and elan, and to be able to use those words competently, and maybe to develop an oral sensibility again. And by oral sensibility, the facility with this type of interaction, which is still deeply human. And so to dwell less upon, well, not less, I mean, we have to dwell upon what this tool is and what its capacities are, but at the same time to reconsider who we are. What is it to have a human interiority? What is it to have that interiority to speak? I mean, we're all not going to be Emerson expressivists, but we could at least become more adroit at the consideration of the fact that when we externalize what we have rumbling around in us that is meaningful, we externalize it because we want desperately a human response who hears what is important to us and responds to it in their own importance, which is exceedingly human and nice.
I can't really speak specifically to who would be developing policies around it. I think that they are looking to put, they have put guardrails around some of it. But I do think that as far as our responsibility as educators, we have to think again back to what we're trying to develop in our students, and that is about developing a sense of empathy and ethics. One of the original questions I thought would be interesting to ask, and I had posed it to Robert, but maybe he thought it was a little too dramatic. But my first question was, how do we keep our citizens from being replaced by or enslaved by robots? It sounds like a good science fiction, but I think part of that is really to develop a deep sense of civic responsibility, agency on the part of students, and you do their pedagogical moves that you do in a classroom by facilitating the learning, by giving kids an opportunity to have a voice, and getting back to, I'm going to circle back to your books because there is, I'm going to make a plug as a literacy person. There's no better way to develop a deep sense of empathy than providing our students with a range of diverse texts, multiple perspectives, and having them read voluminously. The studies are in. It's one thing we can do tomorrow in our classrooms is to make sure that we have diverse, relevant, recent, beautiful collections of resources that represent our community.
Yeah, and in addition to books, just the personal experiences of the diverse classroom that you have, bringing it out into the open, talking about our lives, and then writing about them, and teaching through that. So in addition to the books, it's certainly our collective experiences as a diverse population that could be used in the classroom. And I think a lot of it goes back to the role of the educator, the teacher in the classroom. The things that you just mentioned, I think, would be pivotal for teachers to really come to some kind of agreement in terms of how am I going to use this AI and how do I equip students to do what you just suggested. I think becomes paramount importance for trainers, certainly at the district level to do.
Nicole, you want to weigh on that?
Just to add to that, taking the technology out of it as educators, we want to teach, we want to learn, we want to research. So a question that comes to my mind is, how do we provide these equitable educational resources to students who might not have that access, but we want to contribute to the positive impact to them?
So I'm sensing from the responses that we cannot leave it in the hands of the industry. Right, it didn't work out well with social media, certainly for us, right? Let's sort of take the responsibility as educators in a civic society for the future of AI. We'll open now the floor for questions from our participants. I'm seeing hands up, so yes, put your hands up and Katerina will get to you.
Hello, people here and here virtually. Thank you to the panelists and everyone else who's helping out with this effort. Happy Black History Month. I have a comment and then a question. My comment connects to that. Just, Dr. McIntosh, you just spoke about diversity of voices, and it would have been nice this Black History Month to see someone Black on this panel, as I know there are experts in this community that are Black. So that's just a comment, that's just feedback. But my question actually connects to Dr. Zaiden. I had class, you were my professor, and a concept that I want to bring up today is leapfrogging. And I was very excited to learn about leapfrogging in your class as a special education teacher. And it basically, just to summarize to everyone who may not have heard that before, the idea of leapfrogging, please correct me if there's anything that I leave out or misstate, is basically when students are they have gaps and they might be missing things. And let's say, because I was, teaching special education to 9th graders who sometimes come in at 3rd grade reading levels or 6th grade math levels. And the idea of leapfrogging is like using some sort of strategies to kind of hop them along, and they've missed out on some maybe basic skills, but how do they kind of stay on grade level in terms of like, we're teaching 9th grade stuff and we can't really go back to 3rd grade. So I just wanted to put that out there to the panel and just to ask, what are the opportunities? I can see so many opportunities in my mind. Do you believe that AI is helpful for leapfrogging? And I know, Dr. Fernandez, you talked about like multilingual students and how it can be used there. And so I think that's like a starting point, but just to ask the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it can be used for leapfrogging or scaffolding. I think that it provides a context for children to take risks where they're not being heard by 24 other students. It might just be a headphone. If they're having problems with, dare I say, phonics, they could hear the different sounds. It provides opportunities for children to hear stories where they may not hear them at home. We have a lot of story conventions in early childhood, for example. So you have students at the age of 3, they participate in read-alouds at a level that's commensurate with a 6-year-old perhaps. But you have students coming from homes where there's a rich oral language tradition, not necessarily the reading of books. So you might find something AI-ish that builds on that students will get the pattern of question, answer, response, what you thought about it. So there are many opportunities, I think, in AI that do that. Again, excuse me, I think it goes back to the entire thing of working with teachers, teacher education programs need to incorporate this in their courses in terms of how do we begin to deal with AI? What criteria should we use? Should we use it at all in classroom students? But I think, for me, the major piece is access to those programs and very effective staff development, so that there isn't teacher resistance for whatever reason to use the AI, because even as a panel, we have questions. We're skeptical about some things using artificial intelligence. I think that's an important piece to this component. There's a lot of teacher resistance out there for a variety of different models of teaching and pedagogy. So here you have one that we don't know much about, or we do know much about and we're afraid or not afraid of. I think a lot of that depends on the training of teachers and having these sorts of discussions with them and how do we use it. But in terms of emergent bilinguals and any marginalized group, even students with disabilities, there's a plethora of programs out there that could be used depending on what the presenting problem is and what the particular learning disability is to make the student more able. So I really think that, yes, there's a lot out there that could be used for that.
So to your point that maybe ninth graders may come in with, lower literacy skills, and how are you going to use that to make them feel successful, right? So that takes me back to the teacher, always back to the teacher. Creating the time and the space and having the tools. And so, as an educator and administrator, I always say to myself and, my colleagues, it's our responsibility to make sure that we prepare our teachers, we provide them with the right tools so that they know how to handle those situations, right? So in a case where a child needs to feel successful, should feel always successful for whatever task is brought to them, AI could provide that, like we say, that foundation, that first draft. And then we're going to utilize the gift that we are given is the spoken language, and create those opportunities where everyone is feeding off of each other, learning from one another, the teachers providing these great questions, eliciting these responses, and creating a learning environment that is positive and productive. So it's a little bit of everything, but I do see where, to your point, how AI, and to what Dr. Hernandez said about that it could be a definite tool for leapfrogging. But again, it takes a lot more than that, and it needs to be choreographed in a way that is an environment that is conducive to learning and wanting to learn from each other. So it is possible, and we want to be able to provide you with the right tools. But having these conversations, I'm going to go back to that, and knowing the power of you. Okay, you have the ability, and you have the resources around you. Even if we don't have let's say the technical tools yet, we have each other. And I think our voices are powerful. And again, we're going to leverage these tools in very responsible ways where we're going to be better, and we're going to be better together.
I think one of the mark of a truly great educator is to be learning alongside their students. And it's also to be, for teachers to be learning from each other. And you brought up something that hadn't occurred to me. So getting back to the teacher, using that inquiry in your classroom, in the classrooms you're in, to see what's working. This is so brand new, so emergent. It fills us with both, optimism and dread because of its potential. So part of it is go forth and start your own inquiry around it and see what works.
Let's take some questions also from the live audience, and then Trisha will also ask something on behalf of our the Zoom participants. And if you could keep your question very short, Also, analyze the response is pretty short. So we want as many people to ask questions as possible.
All right, thanks so much. So I guess an overarching question that I'm getting from this is, when we have these new technologies, whose voices are being amplified? And Dr. Snow, I appreciate the analogy between AI and you mentioned the book. You mentioned that books sort of help define what knowledge is. So I'd like to, if panel could expand on that idea a little more and consider the kinds of knowledge that were pushed aside by books, oral traditions, for example, and the way that the technology of the book was wielded as a weapon to in the colonial era as a justification for like our knowledge is superior because we have these books, therefore these other cultures are inferior. I'm wondering then, making that connection to AI and at the beginning you talked about the idea of AI like Chat GPT amplifying dominant voices. So what are the possibilities there, and what are maybe the dangers there?
I think orality was not the technology that was the book doesn't kill orality. It changes the way that knowledge is thought of, how it's stored, all those things. Gladly, we're still tremendously there's a human oral residue in us, the way we think and the way we interact. And yeah, I'll keep that short. I mean, we can go into Plato and the Republic as a repudiation of mimetic learning in Athens and all those things. But these will not go away. I think there is kind of a Gutenberg bubble, and we're going toward a second orality. That's my claim. I think as sound becomes so easily stored, accumulated, searchable, portable, all those things, just as the book, because we're human, much more would prefer sound. We much more prefer voice. It's easier, it's more natural, it's more accessible. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Briefly.
I mean, I'm just getting back to the marginalized voices, and part of what we're trying to do in our district is in the adoption of texts, of core texts for middle and high school. There's a real interest on the part of bringing some of these books and these voices as assured experiences, so that we can make sure that it's not just, To Kill a Mockingbird. That, James Baldwin was writing at the same time, and also that there are amazing books that are cheating the GPT algorithm because they were written, after 2021. So there's no way that you can cheat an essay and do it that way. But there are so many voices out there that we're looking to elevate as a way of combating what the AI potential is and what's sourced out there. So many voices are marginalized, so much of history is marginalized, so much has been erased that is being illuminated in recent years. And we have to make sure that we're keeping that up.
I think to add to that, we have to make sure that those groups that are choosing those books that you just alluded to is an inclusive group of all the different marginalized folks that haven't been represented either in a book or in any kind of other oral, fixation, other kind of mode. I think that's important.
Okay, let's hear some questions from, I see Dr. Vargas raising her hand.
Well, I just am struck by that nobody has responded just make a comment about the composition of the panel while we're at the same time talking about hearing marginalized voices. So I thought that would be an important thing to respond to.
That's a great point. Thank you for that. Can we hear some questions from the online audience, Trisha?
This first question is around English language learners, and the Zoom audience has asked a lot of questions, but these are curated. So this question involves many parts. What role does AI play in bilingual education with students who are new English language learners in terms of academic progress monitoring, assessments, translanguaging in the classroom? And connected to this would be, what would this look like in the younger grades and for students who come from countries where this type of technology does not yet exist? So bilingual education, younger grades.
I think that's a very important question. I think in terms of even the conventions of storytelling, there are many homes where oral language is not encouraged. Children should be seen and not heard, another cliche. So that they're coming in already with a minus in terms of, to tell stories and whatever. I think that, again, there are many forms of AI that you could use even in preschool classrooms where you could begin to develop a receptive ability of the English language. In terms of translanguaging, English language learners may not be able to express, how they felt last night because it was a major snowstorm, let's say. But through the use of tape recorders or listening, they're being able to take risks in the English language or in their native language is a good beginning. And then perhaps the teacher could listen to it and translate it into English and then read it again later on in the week or in the month. But there are many programs that exist already that can be used for that. I see a lot of relevance in that because I think a lot of language learning is risk-taking, as with all learning. Many times we learn that what we have to say is not as appropriate or as meaningful as what others say because teacher reaction has been so different. So if you have an ability to talk to a microphone and listen to yourself responding to a question that the teacher asked in a very low-risk context, it encourages the use of risk-taking for the acquisition of the second language. So there are many ways of utilizing AI for that. I think the other thing too is working with community-based organizations in the area of artificial intelligence and what is it, and perhaps parents of all different students could go to meetings such as this perhaps and discuss what AI is and how do we begin to encourage children to use that. So there are a lot of avenues for the use of AI, I would say, for emergent bilinguals, and translanguaging is very much based not necessarily on AI, but alternative ways of communicating what we know, because historically, programs for English language learners have undermined the importance of the first language. And yet current research suggests that that was a faux pas, that it really has a lot to do with the acquisition of the learning of the second language, basically, because we don't acquire the second as much in the same way that we acquired our first. So I think that there's a lot of promise there for use AI and emergent bilinguals.
So on to a question from the audience. Thank you.
Hi, yeah. Most of the discussion you've been talking about the effect of AI programs like Chat GPT and things on the student experience. And I'm wondering how it can be effective for teachers. For example, I'm an adjunct professor, and for every hour I spend in the classroom, I spend 2 or 3 hours grading papers, doing things like that. And so how can we use tools like AI to streamline some of those processes? And then at what point does it just become computers talking to each other?
So you mean like teachers grading using Chat GPT to grade papers written by Chat GPT, perhaps? Yeah. Anyone?
Because I think you're speaking also to systemic changes too that we need to make, because I think in thinking about the agile component, I think that this tool has the power to sort of amplify or show, right, some of the systemic issues that are going on in education too, because I think that I had a really interesting conversation with another agile, right, about, thinking creatively about how do we use this tool, but a lot of the times we don't have the time to think creatively or innovatively. So I think that this tool can also help with those systemic issues as well. So.
It's interesting. I think that this is such a moving target in so many different ways that I know that when I've been talking to the high school teachers about how they're thinking about it and how they're using it, the initial reaction was really about how do we keep cheating from happening. So it was, and then 2 days later, there was an article that came out that somebody had developed a way of telling if Chat GPT had developed it, so they can deal with it that way. But I think that there are potentials for looking at how it can be a time saver in certain ways. I think that the adjunct model is one that can be tricky too, because it's incredibly takes a great deal of time, and I don't mean to be criticizing Fordham and its systems and structures, but got some snaps there. But I think that that is actually something like the work that's being done in classrooms in the next few months around leapfrogging. I think the answers would largely come from playing around with the systems and seeing what works, because the reason I didn't pick up the mic is not just to watch my airtime, but also because I don't have the answer to that, but I think it could be revealed by the people who are the practitioners who are.
I think Robert said it best in the beginning, it's not a matter of if, but when, and that's going to take a lot of conversations, over time. I mean, AI itself has been around since the mid 1950s, but it's still emerging. So it's going to take a lot of conversations, a lot of empathy, learning from, I feel we're in the same boat in a certain way where we're all learning, whether you're a teacher or a student. So it's going to take even longer to grapple with this more sophisticated technology. And I'm sure more companies are going to come out with other chatbots and other tools for us to use within the educational system. So I think it's just going to take time in learning this and giving each other a break and understanding that. And let's not be afraid to ask those questions. Let's not be afraid to have those difficult conversations. And especially when it comes to providing access to not just students, but teachers as well. How do we contribute and make that easier on teachers' lives as well?
Yes, some teachers use that applications for lesson planning. I heard one teacher on CNN, I believe, being very enthusiastic how much time it saves her to plan lessons. Mixed feelings about that. Let's maybe take a few more questions. Dr. Bogas, you raising your hand?
Yeah, 101 question. Because I don't know what the it is. I need what is the it? I know Chat GPT will allow me to ask the question and get an answer. But you're referencing lots of other tools, and I just need the list of what we're talking about when we say AI.
Yes, we're going to develop, I guess, a list of resources. That'll be a good idea for us to know exactly what are the different generations of those apps, right? So some of them have been around for a long time. We are all using Grammarly here, right? It's free. It's offered by Fordham for students to as a writing assistant. I don't think we feel guilty about using it. I think we've accepted that. That's one level, right? We talk about the other apps
like Chat GPT, but also the ones that you've tried at the beginning when you entered this room. Graham, help us out with the names of that. And Dorcas, one is for music, one is for math. There are others for art too. They're using completely different type of architecture, right? They're the new sort of generation of these generative tools. But it's a good idea to have a list of those, Dr. Bogus. Thank you for the question.
I think for emergent bilinguals, there is a list. There are many different research articles that have looked at it and indicate certain programs, if you will, for AI that you could use. And I'll send them all to Robert, and I'm sure he'll be able to disseminate it to the group. But there are lists that you could use for them.
Yes, let's take, maybe for the sake of time, one question from live audience and then one from Zoom audience, and then we'll transition to closing remarks.
I guess I gotta make it good. Okay. My question, because I think it's come up a few times, is about kind of misinformation and how technology can be used to perpetuate misinformation, especially the technology they have access to outside of class, and then now we're bringing it into class. So just kind of a general question to any of you about how we can kind of combat that misinformation and use it in a way that, I guess, kind of, I think like Munson was saying, be able to think critically about the information that we're being given.
Real quick, again, the power of you, right? The power of making the time and space to have these conversations. So in your classrooms, taking that piece, dissecting it, you know, trying to really dig deep into it and question it, fact check it, research it more, and that's just gonna make you better. So you have the answer, you just have to create the time and space with other people who are trying to answer the same question as you. And that's just who we are as human beings, and that's why we've excelled so much. And so what I kind of almost feel that this is something that's going to be a catalyst to our learning. We're going to have a learning spurt because of this, such a tremendous growth. And so after today, please make sure that you create your own communities of practice in terms of learning, even if it's a group of 2 or 3, but if we continue the conversation and keep sharing, as you're saying, for adjunct professors, teachers, and keep sharing what we're learning along the way, it's going to help all of us.
Yeah, just to that, I think the power of the educator, the power of the classroom teacher is immense. And I think many times we underestimate that power. I think if we get together and we pose these questions, we can certainly become part of the marginalized group that needs answers as well and input.
As a practical way of doing it in our district, we brought together, I don't know if any of you are library media specialists, bringing a group together with our technology experts and then really looking at some of the standards around media literacy. And there is a heightened sense of urgency around the capabilities around these new AI technologies for us to really get on it and make sure that we're developing critical thinkers in this area.
Still have room for one question from the live audience very quickly, and then from the virtual one. And I see another. I know. You'll have to ask the question, of course.
Don't look. Okay. So I have been substituting. Just real quick background. Sorry. I was substituting, so I've been in the school system for a while now, for early childhood. Now I'm in middle school. And we're talking about AI. Now that COVID is done, and knowing where they were with the whole online. Yeah, same. In your opinion, as time passes, I'm looking at the ELA and math scores, the state scores that we have now, with the technology that we're using now, do you think that AI programs would do more harm than good? Like we already have the IEP regulations of children using computers in classes. Then we have iReady for diagnostics and looking at those, it isn't great. And then we have Google Classroom and the Nearpod and Kahoot. I feel like as though looking at it every day as a standpoint, for me, with 8th graders and future 9th graders and 4th graders going into middle school, it seems like more IA programs, it's gonna be worse because it's already where it is now and it's not.
And we also allow another person to ask a question, and then we answer jointly for the sake of time. Anika.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Anika. I teach grade 6 English, that's middle school, and I do agree with you. When we were thrown into this pandemic, we were thrust with the technology. And at the end of the day, I was just showing Graham the technology standards. The technology standards Common Core have not caught up during the pandemic to everything that you've discussed. Kindergarten, turn on the computer. That's the standard that the kids must master. Now we're talking more advanced stuff. How can we bridge the gap when we as teachers, what's moving over our heads are the ELA scores and the math scores. And at the end of the day, when the students sit down to take these exams, there's no AI, there's no technology, it's a paper and a pencil. And they have to be able to utilize these little things called fingers, mind, cognitive, whatever the case is. But I find a struggle when I step into the classroom to pull in all these technology. And I usually tell my students, this is a non-technology room. It is not. The only technology I have is my laptop and I barely use it. At the end of the day, I am accountable for something higher than AI. And I respect it, it does enhance it, but also when you do work in an urban school, you have the limitations there. And it's at the end of the day, you have somebody hounding down your head, get these scores up, get these scores up. And at the end of the day, in March, you take a paper test. How can AI bridge the gap between my accountability? That's all.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Anika. By the way, I think that these are some questions that we dealt with in our translanguaging course last summer. I think if we have 32 teachers in a building, those 32 teachers are going to be at varying degrees of using AI for whatever reason. I think the important thing is, as was discussed in previous questions that were asked, you need to form a group. You need to vent these same frustrations that you bring up as a group, because I think probably the most important piece to the implementation of AI is not the program, but it's the person that implements it. And certainly in preschool, through middle school, through high school, even to the university level, it's the teacher. So we need to, and I understand the frustration very well, having been there, having supervised teachers, and it's not a new sort of, opinion. But I think you need to start looking at what is your responsibility as a classroom teacher. It's not only to give out the papers and pencils, give the tests, give the lesson plans to your supervisor. It's to really take a stand, depending on how strong you are with that. You may want to enlist colleagues, come up with a position, present it to your supervisor, and start dealing with that. Because if it's thrown at you, then it's going to be another thing that you have to do, and it's not going to bridge any kind of difference. It's going to create more difference. So I really implore you to meet with other classroom teachers in your building, see what their responses are, see what their thoughts are, and then come up with some kind of question for your supervisor. How are you going to help us do that when we have these 55 other things to do? Is AI going to help me with these 55 other things to do? If not, why should I do it? This is how I feel about it. But I think it's a conversation, it's a dialogue that has to occur building by building, because if the school district has 15 elementary schools, I'm sure you're going to have 15 different positions in terms of how you should even work with children. So you really need to see yourself, as a provider of change, and really take the position that your voice is equally profound as the school district administrator, as the university professor, as the adjunct professor. there's a lot, you're right there in the classroom with them. So your voice needs to be heard, and I would strongly advise you to do that.
I think what Chat GPT is, the one tool, what it does is exactly what we want students to do, and that's to begin to abstract from things, to have thinking that is analytical, distant from an immediate rhetorical situation that involves all sorts of personal realities. We want to inculcate a type of thought that is general at times, that is analytical, that kind of can be farther away from an immediate personal interaction, something that thinks generally for a general audience. And even in middle school or grade school, I think that's an important skill to develop. How we do that, I don't think, is to eliminate AI from the classroom. It's adapting the questions that we ask and the activities that we offer our students to participate in, knowing the things that we still value. We indeed value the cultivation of the expansion of language. We value the cultivation of critical thinking skills, and we'll do the best we can at cultivating that general ability to analyze and convey what we know to a broad audience, which we all value, which we need at times, so that our speech doesn't become this always a personal rhetorical repartee between, very personalized situations. When I think of rhetoric, I think of a master rhetorician who had a tremendous amount and still holds a lot of power, who was a politician who has the inability to abstract himself from anything and communicates in that way. And I think part of the reason why he's tremendously appealing is a lot of us have not flexed that muscle of abstraction and reasoning well. And we want to, even though that a particular type or product of AI intelligence can do that, we still want that general skill to be a part of what we do day to day in class.
Thank you. We have time only for one very quick question from the Zoom audience and very quick response from the
We have several questions, but I'll try in this question to touch on 3 topics. What is the promise of AI for culturally responsive teaching, addressing the needs of neurologically diverse students, and supporting students' social emotional development? So it's really 3 topics. Thank you.
I think in terms of, I wouldn't go to the neurologically label that you have. In terms of culturally responsive, I think it gives hope that there'll be a more divergent discussion, writing assignment through access of different voices. So I think there is hope for that, providing that the classroom teacher, and again, that's why I said what I said earlier, the classroom teacher really has to understand what AI is, how to best use AI, how to think critically to use that in assessing whatever it is that they pull from, wherever they look for the AI, be the chatbots, whatever. But I think in terms of culturally responsive teaching, if we value diversity, we need to make it inclusive, and we need to look at, different products that we could use to make our teaching more culturally responsive. So I think there is room for that.
Thank you very much for that. And this is the last question for the whole panel. And I expect like a 1-sentence answer from each of you. What will be the most critical question about AI in education in the next few years?
To what degree will AI provide inclusive pedagogy pre-K to graduates?
What training, support, and expectations do we need to provide for our educators and stakeholders to prepare for the changing learning landscape?
No matter the AI-powered educational tool we use, how do we use it to personalize learning and meet diverse needs and learning styles of students?
What exactly does human thinking and learning entail? And how are we, in the way that we think, validate our thinking, quite different from the technologies that help us do those activities of thinking and learning? So a deeper reflection on what we are as we begin to learn what artificial intelligence is and what its capacity entails.
What is our role in shaping what our students will do with the free time gained by efficiently using AI?
It's excellent. Now, before we conclude, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Annie George Puskat to deliver the concluding remarks.
It's a lovely way to end our day.
Well deserved.
Thank you so much to our panelists for their expertise and all of their experiences that you were willing to share with us. We tried to curate a panel that had a variety of experiences and backgrounds to be able to answer this topic, but I do want to comment and recognize and respond on the diversity of the panel, and just to acknowledge that the work we do as educators, that we really want to strive and learn from our own experiences. So both to model for our own students and to learn from them. And so I do want to recognize the missed opportunity to have an additional diversity of panelists up here today. And just that we appreciate the input and we seek that input to be able to continue to be better, just as we are as educators, and continue to want to be that for our students and for the future of our education system. Robert already thanked multiple people, but I do want to just kind of thank them again for all of their work putting on this event today. And there is a QR code here that we seek your evaluation and input, because we do want to do another part of this series on creative conversations and the conversations within education. So please complete the evaluation so that we can get that feedback and we can use that input to be able to continue to better ourselves and better provide you all with opportunities to hear from panelists and experts within the field. So thank you all so much again. Thank you to our panelists, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.